The seductive promise of perfect planning disguises humanity's gravest threat. In my decades observing the rise and fall of economic systems, I've witnessed how seemingly benevolent policies create the very chains they claim to break. The road to serfdom isn't paved with evil intentions, it's constructed stone by stone with the noblest aspirations for social justice, equality, and security. Yet each intervention, each promise of central control, each surrender of individual choice moves us inexorably toward a destination few consciously choose: total dependence on the state. The mechanism is always the same: economic control inevitably becomes political control, and political control becomes personal control. Once we abandon the market's spontaneous coordination for planned direction, we embark on a path where individual freedom becomes an obstacle to collective goals. The warning isn't theoretical, it's historical reality repeated across nations and decades. Understanding this process isn't pessimism, it's the prerequisite for preserving the liberty that makes prosperity possible. Chapter 1: The Seductive Logic of Central Planning. The intellectual appeal of central planning rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of how complex societies actually function. When I first encountered the elegant theories of socialist economists in Vienna, I was struck by their logical consistency within their own framework. They assumed what cannot be assumed, that planners can access the knowledge necessary for rational economic calculation. The allure begins with observable problems. Markets produce inequality, unemployment, business cycles, and apparent waste through competition. Central planning promises to eliminate these inefficiencies through rational coordination. Why tolerate the chaos of millions of individual decisions when expert planners could optimize outcomes for everyone? The mathematical elegance of input-output models and linear programming creates an illusion of scientific precision that appeals to intellectuals seeking rational solutions to social problems. This reasoning contains a fatal flaw. It confuses the knowledge of general principles with knowledge of particular circumstances. A central planner might understand macroeconomic theory perfectly while remaining ignorant of the specific needs, preferences, and opportunities that only individuals experience directly. The mechanic knows his customer's urgency, the farmer knows his soil's peculiarities, the shopkeeper knows her community's changing tastes. This localized knowledge cannot be transmitted to central authorities without losing its essential character, the contextual understanding that gives it practical value. Furthermore, planning appears scientific precisely because it employs mathematical models and statistical aggregates. But true science recognizes the limits of its methods. In economics, the scientific pretense, the inappropriate application of natural science methods to social phenomena, creates dangerous illusions of control. We begin believing we can engineer society like we engineer machines, forgetting that social systems involve conscious beings whose behavior changes based on their expectations and interpretations of the very plans designed to control them. The seduction intensifies during crises. Economic downturns, wartime scarcity, or social unrest create urgent demands for immediate action. Democratic deliberation seems too slow, market adjustments too painful, individual initiative too unreliable. Emergency powers promise swift solutions, temporarily suspending normal constitutional constraints. Yet emergencies never truly end. New crises always emerge to justify continued central control, creating a ratchet effect where temporary powers become permanent features. The planning mindset transforms complex coordination problems into simple optimization exercises. If we can maximize production, minimize waste, and ensure equal distribution, why shouldn't we? The appeal lies in reducing the bewildering complexity of millions of individual decisions to a manageable set of administrative choices. This reduction makes planning appear not only possible but obviously superior to the apparent chaos of market processes. Chapter 2: From Economic Control to Political Control. The transformation from limited economic intervention to comprehensive political control follows predictable stages. each seemingly justified by the failures of the previous stage. Once a society accepts the principle that economic outcomes should be centrally determined rather than market-discovered, it initiates a process that political forces cannot easily contain or reverse. Economic planning requires unprecedented information gathering about every aspect of production and consumption. Planners must know production capabilities, resource availability, consumer preferences, technological possibilities, and countless other details across the entire economy. This necessitates comprehensive reporting requirements, standardized procedures, and bureaucratic oversight that penetrates every corner of economic life. Privacy becomes an obstacle to planning efficiency, and individual discretion becomes a threat to plan coordination. When initial plans fail, as they inevitably must, given the impossible knowledge requirements, authorities face a crucial choice: admit the impossibility of central planning or blame insufficient control for the failures. Political incentives strongly favor the latter interpretation. Plan failures get attributed to incomplete information, inadequate authority, resistance from private actors, or insufficient commitment to collective goals. The logical response becomes more comprehensive planning, greater enforcement powers, and reduced scope for individual discretion. Opposition to planning transforms from legitimate policy disagreement into sabotage of scientifically determined collective goals. If the plan represents rational optimization based on expert knowledge, resistance must stem from selfishness, ignorance, or antisocial motivations. Political dissent becomes economic crime because questioning the plan undermines the coordination necessary for its success. Independent media threatens plan consistency by reporting unauthorized information or questioning official priorities, creating pressure for information control. The democratic process itself becomes problematic for effective planning. Voters lacking technical expertise might choose policies contradicting scientific optimization. Interest groups might demand provisions inconsistent with rational resource allocation. Electoral cycles create pressure for short-term popularity over long-term planning horizons. Democratic institutions appear as obstacles to rational administration rather than expressions of popular sovereignty that deserve respect. Administrative experts gradually displace elected representatives as primary decision-makers in all areas touching economic life, which means virtually all areas of social life. Technical complexity provides justification. How can legislators without specialized training evaluate optimal steel production targets, proper wage levels, or efficient transportation networks? Bureaucratic agencies accumulate quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial powers, determining both rules and their application while answering primarily to administrative superiors rather than electoral accountability. The concentration of economic power enables political control through dependency. When government controls employment, housing, education, and healthcare, individual survival depends on official approval. Political opposition becomes personally costly in ways that democratic societies have not traditionally experienced. The economic foundations of political independence erode as private spheres of action disappear. Chapter 3: The Erosion of Legal Foundations. Constitutional government depends fundamentally on the rule of law, general rules applied equally to all rather than specific commands directed at particular people for particular purposes. Economic planning undermines this foundation by requiring countless discretionary decisions about who produces what, who receives which goods, and who bears various costs based on administrative judgment rather than legal principle. Traditional law develops through accumulated precedent and gradual refinement over centuries, embodying the wisdom of countless particular decisions tested against practical experience. It provides stable expectations that enable individuals to plan their own lives and coordinate with others through voluntary agreements. Planning law, by contrast, must be continuously adjusted based on changing circumstances and evolving plan requirements. Predictability becomes impossible when rules change frequently to serve administrative convenience rather than legal consistency. Property rights represent the cornerstone of legal order and individual freedom because they enable individuals to use their local knowledge without requiring permission from central authorities for every decision. Planning regimes cannot tolerate genuine property rights because they prevent authorities from redirecting resources according to plan priorities. Private property becomes redefined as hoarding when individuals save for future needs. Business profits become exploitation when entrepreneurs earn returns on successful ventures. And voluntary exchanges become speculation when markets respond to changing conditions. The distinction between legislation and administration disappears under comprehensive planning because legislatures can only establish broad goals while administrative agencies must determine specific implementation affecting individual rights. But these administrative decisions shape individual opportunities just as profoundly as traditional laws. Citizens find themselves subject to detailed regulations they never voted for, created by officials they never elected, accountable to superiors they cannot influence through normal democratic processes. Legal challenges to planning decisions threaten the entire system's coherence because judicial review based on individual rights or legal precedent can override administrative determinations essential for plan coordination. If courts can protect property rights against plan requirements or enforce procedural protections against administrative efficiency, comprehensive planning becomes impossible. Judicial independence must yield to administrative necessity, and legal interpretation becomes subordinated to plan objectives rather than constitutional principles. Emergency powers provide the constitutional bridge from limited to unlimited government by suspending normal legal protections temporarily. But temporary measures become permanent features as authorities discover new problems requiring ongoing attention. Constitutional limitations get suspended indefinitely while legislatures delegate increasing authority to executive agencies supposedly better equipped to handle complex technical issues that democratic deliberation cannot adequately address. The legal profession itself transforms under planning regimes from advocates for individual rights against government power to experts in administrative procedures serving plan implementation. Legal education shifts from constitutional principles and individual rights to regulatory compliance and bureaucratic navigation. The adversarial system gives way to administrative consultation as lawyers become facilitators of plan coordination rather than defenders of individual autonomy. Chapter 4: The Psychology of Planned Society. Central planning transforms not only institutional structures but also individual psychology and social relationships in ways that make return to free institutions increasingly difficult. A planned society requires citizens with fundamentally different attitudes toward authority, personal responsibility, and social cooperation than those necessary for maintaining free institutions. Independent entrepreneurship becomes antisocial behavior in a planned economy because the entrepreneur's essential function, discovering new opportunities, taking risks with uncertain outcomes, creating value through voluntary exchange, directly conflicts with planned stability and administrative control. The entrepreneur disrupts established patterns by responding to profit opportunities that planners haven't anticipated or authorized. Success through market means appears as selfish ambition rather than social contribution, while failure to follow assigned roles becomes evidence of insufficient social consciousness. Personal responsibility atrophies when individuals cannot control the consequences of their decisions through their own choices and efforts. If employment, housing, education, and consumption are administratively determined rather than market-earned through individual contribution, personal effort loses its connection to personal outcome. Citizens become petitioners seeking administrative favor rather than producers creating mutual benefit through voluntary exchange. The psychological foundations of self-reliance erode as dependency becomes the normal condition of social life. The planned society requires cultivating a new type of person, the organization man who finds fulfillment through identification with collective goals rather than personal achievement. Traditional virtues like independence, self-reliance, and voluntary association become obstacles to social harmony because they encourage individual judgment that might conflict with administrative direction. Loyalty to administrative hierarchy replaces loyalty to family, community, or personal conscience as the highest social value. Social relationships become politicized when economic outcomes depend on administrative decisions rather than market processes because personal advancement requires political connections and bureaucratic maneuvering rather than productive contribution to others' welfare. Competition shifts from creating value for customers to securing favor from officials who control access to opportunities. Corruption becomes inevitable when discretionary power rather than market performance determines individual fate. The planned society cannot tolerate genuine pluralism because competing values and priorities undermine planned coherence and administrative efficiency. Religious freedom threatens social unity when religious principles conflict with planned objectives or create loyalties that compete with state authority. Intellectual freedom becomes dangerous when independent thinking questions administrative wisdom or suggests alternative approaches to social problems. Cultural diversity appears as an obstacle to efficient coordination rather than a source of social enrichment and innovation. Citizens gradually lose the capacity for self-government as they become accustomed to administrative direction in all aspects of life. Democratic participation seems meaningless when real decisions occur within bureaucratic hierarchies rather than electoral processes. Political engagement becomes reduced to choosing between competing groups of administrators rather than determining fundamental policy directions or constitutional principles. The skills and attitudes necessary for democratic citizenship atrophy through disuse. Chapter 5: Historical Patterns and Contemporary Warnings. The progression from well-intentioned intervention to comprehensive control has repeated across cultures and historical periods with remarkable consistency, suggesting that the dynamics I observed are not accidents of particular circumstances but inherent tendencies in any attempt at comprehensive social planning. My wartime observations of Nazi Germany revealed how quickly democratic societies could transform into totalitarian systems when they abandoned market coordination for administrative direction. The German hyperinflation of the 1920s created demands for monetary stability that empowered technocratic management of the economy. Price controls during the Depression seemed necessary to prevent exploitation of workers and consumers. Emergency powers during the political crisis appeared essential for maintaining order and preventing communist revolution. Each measure, individually defensible under crisis conditions, contributed to dismantling the institutional foundations of limited government. The Nazi economic system wasn't simply imposed by dictatorial fiat, it evolved through seemingly rational responses to genuine problems that democratic processes had failed to solve. Business cartels received government backing to eliminate destructive competition. Labor unions gained official recognition in exchange for accepting wage controls. Agricultural programs protected farmers from market volatility through production quotas and price supports. Each intervention created new problems requiring additional controls, until comprehensive direction replaced market coordination. Similar patterns emerged in democratic socialist countries after World War II, demonstrating that planning tendencies aren't limited to totalitarian regimes. Britain's wartime planning seemed so successful that peacetime planning appeared obviously superior to market chaos and business cycle instability. Nationalization of coal, steel, and railways promised to serve public interest rather than private profit. Comprehensive welfare programs would eliminate insecurity and poverty through rational resource allocation. Yet each expansion of state control reduced individual choice and concentrated power in administrative hierarchies accountable primarily to themselves. The Swedish model, often cited as successful democratic socialism, demonstrates how comprehensive welfare states create their own momentum toward expanded control. High tax rates necessitate detailed monitoring of economic activity to prevent tax avoidance. Universal benefits require bureaucratic determination of eligibility and appropriate service levels. Labor market regulations intended to protect workers reduce employment flexibility and entrepreneurial opportunity. The system's apparent success conceals growing rigidities that become visible only during periods of economic stress. Contemporary America exhibits troubling parallels to these historical precedents in ways that few Americans recognize or acknowledge. Financial crises generate demands for increased regulatory control over banking and investment that create moral hazard and reduce market discipline. Healthcare costs justify comprehensive government management of medical decisions that reduces innovation and individual choice. Climate change requires unprecedented coordination of economic activity that concentrates power in administrative agencies accountable primarily to international organizations rather than American citizens. The administrative state grows through accumulated delegations of legislative authority to executive agencies supposedly possessing superior technical expertise that Congress lacks. Legislators find themselves unable to write detailed regulations for complex industries, so they grant broad authority to agencies to implement vague statutory goals. These agencies accumulate quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial powers while answering primarily to administrative superiors rather than electoral accountability, creating a fourth branch of government that the Constitution never authorized. Chapter 6: The Illusion of Democratic Planning. The most dangerous variant of central planning comes disguised as democratic reform rather than authoritarian imposition, making it particularly seductive to citizens who value freedom but desire greater security and equality. Democratic planning promises to combine the efficiency of central coordination with the legitimacy of popular sovereignty, claiming that expert administration can implement the people's will scientifically. This approach contains a fundamental contradiction that its advocates rarely acknowledge. Genuine democracy requires that individuals can choose different paths based on their own values and circumstances, while effective planning requires unified direction based on expert judgment about optimal outcomes. The two goals cannot be simultaneously achieved because they rest on incompatible assumptions about the source of legitimate authority and the possibility of social coordination. Democratic planning typically begins with popular votes on broad objectives that virtually everyone supports: full employment, universal healthcare, environmental protection, economic equality, or national security. These goals appear obviously desirable, and democratic majorities readily endorse them without considering the specific means necessary for achievement or the trade-offs involved in implementation. The democratic mandate provides legitimacy for whatever administrative measures experts deem necessary. The translation from democratic goals to administrative implementation creates enormous scope for bureaucratic interpretation that voters never directly authorize and often cannot understand. What level of unemployment constitutes full employment that justifies massive government spending? Which medical treatments should universal health care include? And how should rationing decisions be made when resources are limited? How much environmental protection justifies economic costs that reduce living standards? Administrators must answer these questions based on their professional judgment rather than electoral guidance. Interest group politics becomes the primary mechanism for influencing administrative decisions in democratic planning systems because organized constituencies can effectively lobby for favorable treatment while diffuse public interests remain unrepresented. Labor unions secure wage guarantees. Environmental groups obtain regulatory privileges. Business associations receive protective regulations, and professional organizations gain licensing requirements that exclude competition. The result is planning that serves organized constituencies rather than general welfare, even when originally motivated by democratic ideals. Legislative oversight of administrative implementation faces insuperable practical obstacles that make democratic accountability largely illusory. Representatives cannot master the technical details of comprehensive planning across multiple industries and policy areas. Committee hearings and agency reports provide only superficial accountability for decisions that fundamentally affect individual lives and national prosperity. The complexity of modern administration exceeds the capacity of democratic institutions designed for simpler societies. The democratic facade gradually erodes as citizens recognize their inability to influence actual policy through electoral processes that determine personnel but not principles. Voter turnout declines when elections determine which administrators will implement predetermined policies rather than which policies will be implemented. Democratic institutions become empty forms providing legitimacy for administrative rule rather than meaningful mechanisms for popular sovereignty. The substance of self-government disappears while its forms are carefully preserved. Citizens become increasingly cynical about democratic processes that promise popular control but deliver administrative direction. Political campaigns focus on symbolic issues and personal characteristics rather than substantive policy differences because real decisions occur within bureaucratic hierarchies insulated from electoral influence. Democracy transforms from a method of social coordination into a ritual of legitimation for expert rule. Chapter 7: Defending Freedom in the Digital Age. Contemporary technology creates both unprecedented threats to individual liberty and remarkable new opportunities for spontaneous coordination that can preserve freedom against central planning. Understanding these dynamics is essential for applying spontaneous order principles to modern policy challenges and preventing digital technologies from becoming instruments of comprehensive control. Digital technology enables surveillance and control capabilities that previous generations of planners could only dream of achieving. Real-time monitoring of financial transactions, communication patterns, social media activity, and physical movements provides administrators with unprecedented information about individual behavior, preferences, and associations. Algorithmic analysis can identify potential dissent, predict resistance to government policies, and target intervention with surgical precision that eliminates privacy as a practical protection against official power. Yet these same technologies also enable decentralized coordination on scales previously impossible, demonstrating how spontaneous order can emerge through voluntary cooperation without central direction. Cryptocurrency systems like Bitcoin show how monetary institutions can develop through voluntary adoption of shared protocols rather than government mandate. Open-source software demonstrates how complex products can be created through spontaneous collaboration among thousands of independent contributors. Digital platforms allow individuals to coordinate economic activity without traditional intermediaries or regulatory oversight. The regulatory response to digital innovation reveals the eternal tension between spontaneous order and administrative control in particularly clear form. Established industries seek regulatory protection against digital disruption that threatens their market positions. Government agencies demand oversight authority over new technologies that enable coordination beyond their control. International organizations promote standardized protocols that limit experimentation and innovation in favor of administrative convenience. Financial technology particularly threatens traditional monetary control mechanisms that enable government spending through inflation and provide tools for macroeconomic management. Central banks lose their monopoly over money creation when individuals can transact using cryptocurrencies that operate independently of official monetary policy. Government spending becomes more difficult to finance through inflation when people can escape to alternative currencies that maintain purchasing power. Monetary policy becomes less effective when the money supply cannot be centrally controlled and regulated. The battle over digital privacy represents a fundamental contest between individual autonomy and administrative authority that will determine whether technology enhances freedom or enables control. Comprehensive surveillance enables optimal resource allocation by providing complete information about individual preferences and capabilities, making central planning theoretically more feasible than ever before. Privacy protection prevents this optimization by limiting administrative knowledge and reducing planning effectiveness, but it preserves the individual autonomy necessary for spontaneous order. Educational technology offers similar tensions between centralization and decentralization that illustrate broader principles about knowledge and authority. Online learning platforms enable individuals to acquire knowledge without institutional gatekeepers or geographic constraints. Personalized instruction adapts to individual learning styles rather than standardized curricula designed for administrative convenience. Yet educational authorities seek to regulate online providers and maintain control over credentialing systems that determine access to economic opportunities. Social media platforms demonstrate how spontaneous coordination can emerge through voluntary association while also showing how these same mechanisms can be manipulated by both government and private actors seeking to influence behavior. The challenge lies in preserving the spontaneous coordination benefits while preventing manipulation that undermines genuine choice and voluntary cooperation. The path forward requires conscious choice between technological empowerment of individual freedom and technological enhancement of administrative control. The same tools that can eliminate privacy and enable comprehensive planning can also eliminate barriers to voluntary coordination and individual choice. The outcome depends on the institutional framework within which these technologies develop and operate. Conclusion. The road to serfdom remains as relevant today as when I first traced its path during the darkness of World War II, though the scenery along the route has changed dramatically. The destination hasn't changed, a society where individual choice yields to administrative direction, where voluntary coordination gives way to central command, where the spontaneous order that creates prosperity is replaced by the planned disorder that destroys it. What has changed is our capacity for both resistance and submission. Digital technology can eliminate the final barriers to comprehensive control by providing administrators with complete information about individual behavior and preferences. Yet these same technologies can create new mechanisms for preserving individual autonomy through decentralized coordination that operates beyond traditional government reach. The choice remains ours, but the window for choosing may be narrower than previous generations enjoyed, and the consequences of choosing wrongly may be more permanent. The warning isn't pessimistic prophecy but urgent invitation to conscious vigilance and deliberate action. Free societies aren't natural states that maintain themselves automatically, they're artificial achievements requiring constant defense against the eternal temptation of planned perfection. Understanding the road to serfdom isn't enough. We must choose different paths while we still can, building institutions that preserve spontaneous order against the forces that would destroy it.